to order tonight's meeting of the Eugene Budget Committee at 5:32 p.m. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us in this virtual meeting format. With the city's budget office and the council chambers moving to the new City Hall location this summer, we look forward to having the opportunity to meet in person in the future, hopefully at our next meeting, whenever that may be. I think this might be our last Zoom budget meeting. Fingers crossed. But that's very exciting to me. And as always, I want to acknowledge that it is a privilege to be here and to be able to participate in these conversations that we're able to have in this committee. It's a privilege not shared by everyone in our community, and in particular, many of the people in our community most affected by our budget decisions are also those least able to participate in these processes. So I ask everyone to always keep that in mind throughout all of our deliberations. My approach this year is going to be similar to prior times we've been looking at supplemental budgets, which is where we're going to hear a presentation and then give every budget committee member a chance to share their thoughts with the larger group in a round robin. And so I'll open it up to comments, general questions. Everyone will get 3 minutes for a first round, and then we'll use a traditional queue for additional questions and comments. But with that, I'm ready to turn it over to City Manager Maderi for our presentation.
Thank you so much. Feels really good to be here, and we are, in fact, in the middle of a move. So not only are we moving, but we're like it's current. So those of us that are in this first stage of a move actually don't have an office in either place. So I'm coming to you sitting in a vacant office, which I'll refer to again. It feels very nostalgic of my first budget committee meeting in this role, where I was sitting alone in an office with my laptop stacked on books, trying to, it was just very odd. And here I am again. Feels like a full circle. Really happy to be here tonight talking about the supplemental budget. And this is something else I'll talk about a little bit tonight, were promises I made to this group around being engaged and transparent and including you. And so here we are tonight in the middle of our biennial budget to talk to you about the supplemental budget and give you an opportunity to give us some feedback on budget strategies, supplemental budget, and all of those things. I think, okay, perfect. We have a lot to cover. So I'm calling it the main agenda here because, as you know, I like to sneak a few slides in before. So I have a few things I want to say before we jump into the main agenda. But Twyla and I will be co-presenting, and she'll go over a financial overview. She'll hand it back to me for some of the budget strategies that are built into the supplemental budget, and she'll cover more in-depth pieces of the supplemental budget and introduce the feedback time. So in terms of this nostalgia and promises, I was thinking back and I was like, how many times have I diagrammed out what I think would be a much healthier process for us to follow as part of the budget? And in that, I think this blue one was the first one, and it was part of the budget I did alone in a room during COVID. And that was important to me because we were having a conversation about, shouldn't we be setting priorities before we're setting budgets? And I started to talk about, yeah, if we were in a perfect situation, we would be doing a level of community engagement, say a community survey, hearing what their concerns were, following that with some type of planning, strategic planning, goal setting process, and that the budget should really be built around that. And then you kind of go from there in terms of implementing the budget, getting feedback on the budget, and you kind of just repeat that cycle. And I have shared that over and over in many budgets, and pretty excited today to be able to say we've actually kind of done it. So we're kind of in the rhythm now. And it started with the community survey that we did kind of just coming off the heels of COVID. It was the first one we'd done in over a decade. And that helped us understand, I think a lot of us knew, but really helped us understand from the community their top concerns around homelessness and housing, crime, cleanliness of public spaces, and transportation. We followed that with doing some goal setting with the council and some strategic planning. Oops, sorry, I jumped the gun there. And put together and adopted the very first ever Eugene strategic plan that really focused on those urgent community needs that were identified in the survey, communication and outreach, which we all know is needed even more today than it was when we adopted the strategic plan, organizational well-being, and a culture of belonging. All of that fed into how we developed the 2023 through 2025 budget, which many of you are part of, and it was a challenging budget to create, because here we are going into this and we're also needing to cut somewhere around $25 million out of the budget, which we did. But we did that with that lens of what the community priorities were, what was in the strategic plan, and really tried to take the opportunity to continue to focus our efforts in those areas. And I just want to say, we did all of this during pretty significantly challenging times. Either we were in the pandemic or we were coming out of it. We had a lot of other things going on around protests, wildfires, budget issues. And yet I'm so enormously proud of our team for being able to dive into doing a lot of practices differently, which I know is really hard. I'm also really proud of you and the city council for partnering on all of this and getting through it together. Speaking of nostalgia, some of you know that I did this, not all of you, but I've been really trying to understand. It started with the work with revenue advisors, and it's continued on, really trying to understand how we got where we are. And we've been talking a lot about some of the property tax measures and limitations and things that went into place that have helped us, made us struggle more financially. And so we went into archives and brought out all of the budget books that sort of preceded that. So kind of in the late 80s, early 90s, trying to just get a sense. If you want to know what's going on within a community, if you read the budget message from the city manager every year, you get a pretty good sense of what's happening, especially in the organization. It tells a really good story. So I went through, we have all those scanned and read all those budget messages, looked at all the statistics, and there's some pretty interesting things that come out of that. I'm going to share one, which I think is pretty astonishing. And this is just literally a photo I took out of the budget book. And Twyla is actually going to speak to this more later. But every year, the budget, at least the proposed budget, had the statistic around FTE per thousand. Twyla's going to bring you to the current. This is, back in the late 80s to early 90s. And what is really kind of important about this slide to me and why I'm sharing it is that when I started to look at the numbers and do the math, I realized that in 1996, when I was hired, we had 1.6 per thousand more employees, which equals about 285 more employees. So when I started in 1996, the city had 285 more employees than we do today. And we were serving about 54,000 less people. So 285 more people, and here we are today with 54,000 more community members. And if you also go back to 1996, you recognize that the city of Springfield had about 50,000 in population. So what we've gone through over the last 28 years has been similar to if in 1996 the city manager had said, hey, we're just going to take over all of the governance of Springfield with the same amount of employees we have. That's that may seem dramatic, but it definitely adds to the feeling of employees feeling like they're being asked to do more with less, and you'll hear that from many of our employees. And I want to be really transparent. It also leads to the community feeling like they're paying more for less, and that is also true. So it's a very delicate balance as you think about how we get through this. Fun fact, I also found in the budget book the year prior to when I was hired, my position that was added. So the budget committee actually added a position to fix irrigation systems that had broken during one of the budget decisions to turn off all of the water. So I actually got hired back by a budget committee motion, so thank you for that. And the other thing that happened as I read through it is I realized the people that have come before me and the leadership that's come before me and how much work was done. And in particular, I'll give a little bit of a shout out to Councilor Zlanka, who, when I was reading through these budgets, I was like, oh my God, I cannot believe they did all this. It was huge amounts of work. And I saw that he was on the budget committee during the time. And so I add the fun card because I always like to have a little humor about feeling like I want to bake everybody casseroles and bring them because I know you did so much work. I'm going to flip forward to the revenue advisors. We talked about this a lot during the budget, the need to have revenue. And I just want to walk through what that group did. So we had about 10 community members. Both Eliza and Raina represented the budget committee. Councilors Zelenka and Leach represented the city council. And they were rounded out by 6 other community members. And what they essentially did was they took a pretty deep dive into how we got here. So not quite as deep as what I just shared with you, but we did go through a lot about our history, property tax limitations, to help understand the general lay of the land. When we did that, we also talked to them about the different problems we were trying to solve, because we all know we had this like $8.3 million plug that was put in the biennial budget that we either needed to solve with reductions or revenue or a combination of both. But there's also things that are looming out there, areas at risk, things that have been funded one time that are potentially going to drop off, services that are funded with levies that are going to at some point come to an end. And so there's some things that we also need to consider around services that aren't in this immediate critical near-term gap. And then also new and expanded services for things that the community is asking for. So they did that. They also reviewed a revenue report staff had put together, and I think each of you have received, that looked at about, I think, 47-ish different revenue types. And of that, they expressed an interest in looking a lot closer at about 15. And what they did with that close look then was look at, for the near-term gap, for the areas at risk, and for new and expanded services, which one of those 15 sort of made sense to solve which problem, and eventually sort of came up with the ones that made the most sense. I often talk about the best solutions make sense and they feel right. And I want to be really clear that the revenue team did not, revenue advisors didn't have the time, and we didn't get to the feels right part. So when we start to talk about some of our solutions, I don't want in any way to convey that they were like, this is exactly the right amount and the right thing. They were very clear we need to do some work to make sure the feels right part works, and that's part of what our strategy is. At the same time, okay, have you guys ever seen the demotivational poster? So this is supposed to be humor again. But at the same time that was happening and the revenue team's looking at revenue, we were on the other side of that, continuing to explore. We've been shifting to this program-based budget, and every single program in the city was being looked at for potential scaling. So if we aren't able to achieve any new revenue, how are we going to address the service needs, and how are we going to scale back? And so every single program, regardless of what fund you were in, we're asked to do this. And so that I would have like really a giant menu of options and an understanding of what kinds of impacts would happen. This is a lot of work. So I want to especially acknowledge anybody in the organization that does work in finance, in particular our division managers, which run things like the Parks and Open Space division, the finance division, the patrol division. Those folks, their department budget managers and the exec team have done a ton of work on trying to help us understand that and come up with the solutions that we're going to provide you tonight. So with that, I think I want to just say, I thought I was turning it over to Twyla, but I forgot. Through all of that work that I've been doing, and through all the work that we've been doing, I've just been filled with this enormous amount of gratitude for the team we have now, the teams that came before, and just all of the staff that are out doing this hard work and really taking so much pride in serving this community. With that, it's now Twyla's slide.
Thank you, Sarah. Good evening, everyone. So we'll start with something we've talked about before, which is our ongoing structural gap in our general fund, where expenditures are growing at a faster pace than revenues. As Sarah mentioned, our 2023-2025 adopted budget contained $25 million in budget strategies to address our structural gap. And we also repurposed over $5 million in existing funding to make additional investments in downtown, unhoused, and alternative response programs. But even with these efforts, a structural gap remained, and an $8.3 million revenue placeholder in the second year of the biennium was included in our adopted budget, as we knew additional work was needed to evaluate potential new revenues and additional budget strategies as we look to the second year of the biennium that begins this July. The gap has since increased to $13.9 million in our current forecast, with our near-term gap this biennium remaining at $8.3 million, an additional ongoing need of $5.6 million added in FY26, which will be in the first year of the next biennium. So the last time the Budget Committee met in December, the ongoing general fund budget gap for the base case scenario was $10.5 million. And since then, the base case budget gap has increased to 13.9, driven largely by continued upward cost pressures as shown here. We received our Eugene specific advisory employer rate contribution rates for the next biennium from the first actuary, and those rates were higher than anticipated. Also, new legislation that was passed during the short legislative session this year, which will increase our future PERS rates. And inflation is not dropping as quickly as the market had anticipated and as we had hoped, and continues to lag high. And this adds upward pressure on the cost of personnel services over the forecast period. So this slide shows general fund revenues over the last 5 years. Property taxes, EWEB contributions in lieu of taxes or SILT, and service charges are the top 3 revenue types in the general fund. These 3 revenue types account for approximately 85% of general fund revenues, with property taxes representing the largest share by far at 71%. If you look to the table on the right, this shows the actual average annual growth of these revenue types over the 5 fiscal years, from fiscal year 19 through fiscal year 23. Property tax revenue growth is driven by the constitutional limitations of Oregon's property tax system. Our SILT revenue is driven by the price of electricity and how much is consumed. EWEB minimized electric price increases during this time, and combined with warmer winter weather and pandemic impacts, this resulted in a 5-year average of no SILT revenue growth for the city. There was negative growth in service charges during this time period, and this can be largely attributed to the pandemic-related closures and restrictions during that time. And the bottom row of the table shows the average annual growth rate across all revenue types in the general fund over these 5 years is just 2.6%. So now we'll look at expenses in the general fund, where personnel is the largest category at 75% of total expenses. It takes many employees to deliver services to our community. The table on the right shows the average annual growth of general fund expenses over the same 5 fiscal years from FY19 through 23. This data represents the funds actually spent over this time frame. Personnel expenses generally go faster than materials and services due to cost increases above typical inflation, such as retirement costs and healthcare. Non-departmental expenses are primarily made up of transfers out to other funds, and the higher growth rate during this time frame can be partially attributed to additional support of non-general funds during the pandemic. The average annual growth rate across all expenses in the general fund over these 5 years was 3%, which reflects a lot of effort to cut costs and increase efficiencies. Even with a high degree of fiscal stewardship, the growth in expenses exceeded the average revenue growth of just 2.6% over the same time frame. This imbalance is generally managed by drawing down reserves, which makes it difficult to add ongoing services or build up reserves to weather unanticipated events in the future. The average annual expense growth rate of 3% excludes expenditures of one-time ARPA funds, one-time state homelessness response funds, and one-time opioid settlement funds in order to provide an apples-to-apples comparison of revenues to expenditures. However, we use these dollars for high-priority needs that did not have other funding sources, so including these expenses provides a better picture of the service level needs. If we include expenditures from these one-time funds, the average annual expense growth rate over these 5 years increases to 5.1%. Our current revenue structure would not support adding these additional expenses, and thus we need to find either new revenue or make additional service reductions to balance revenues and expenditures over time. So this chart shows the amount of general fund budget strategies that have been implemented over time. These strategies represent a mix of service reductions, efficiency savings, realignments, such as services moved to other funds where appropriate, and miscellaneous revenue increases, such as fees and charges for service. Budget strategies resulting from the Great Recession started in earnest in fiscal year 10 and have occurred in most years since that time. While many of these strategies were ongoing in nature, some were one-time or other limited duration items. $60 million of budget strategies since fiscal year 10 is significant and results in a very lean organization. Sarah mentioned that in her opening remarks. And while we always look at ways to be as efficient as possible and streamline service delivery as we look to the future, the impacts of the strategies have been felt both within our organization and also by the community as service areas have been reduced. All at the same time, our community is growing with increased service demands. So this next chart compares general fund adopted budget revenues and expenses. The dashed green line shows revenues and the solid blue line shows expenditures. And these lines include the budget strategies for the previous slide as indicated by the orange arrows. So while our revenues do continue to grow over time, they are not growing as quickly as expenditures. The budget strategies are necessary to better align expenses with available revenues and to manage our reserves so that we have an adequate savings account for unexpected events. Many factors cause expenses to grow faster than revenues, as we've talked about, such as high inflation, continued PERS rate increases, and meeting the needs of a growing population. Given the limited growth of our current general fund revenues, additional budget strategies will continue to be necessary not only to live within our means, but also as we build up reserves, which have remained below the target level since the pandemic. And this chart shows the general fund adopted operating budget per capita over 18 years between fiscal year 08 and fiscal year 25. It's important to note that these figures have been adjusted for inflation and are shown in today's dollars. You can see that the trend has been relatively flat over time, and we're spending less per resident today than we were back in FY08, indicating that expenditure growth is not keeping pace with inflation and population growth. This slide is over the same time period and shows the total citywide FTE per thousand population across all funds. The trend has remained largely flat following recession-era reductions, and more recent increases in the past few years are primarily due to non-general funds growth, such as the FTE added with our community safety payroll temps. While citywide FTE per thousand population has increased in recent years, we continue to remain about 7% below pre-recession levels. And then this next slide is showing our general fund specifically. So when you think about the picture that Sarah was showing, you can see that FTE per thousand population has continuously declined as the budget strategies have been implemented over time. We now have fewer general fund employees providing services to a growing population, and the current FTE per thousand population is about 20% below pre-recession levels. So as we solve for the near-term structural gap in the general fund, we know we continue to have a long-term funding gap that continues in the out years of the forecast as the expenditure growth will continue to outpace revenue growth. The tools shown here are longer-term strategies that will take more time to develop and can't be implemented in time to address our funding gap this July. These concepts are reflected in our city's state and federal legislative priorities and will continue to be part of the ongoing discussion for solutions as part of future council conversations. Additionally, while there are some actions we can take at the local level, there are issues such as property tax reform, which would require a solution at the statewide level. And now I'll turn things back to Sarah and she'll discuss revenue and budget strategies. Sarah, you're muted.
Of course I am. So this slide is not animated. Sorry. For whatever reason, it's not There we go. Hold on a second. Yeah, okay. So the slide was animated, and it's okay. Just put it back up. I'll just walk through it. It's totally fine. I wasn't sure if it was my computer or not. Where did it go? We're bringing it back. It's totally fine. Leave it like that. So on the left-hand side, if you were seeing the full animation, on the left-hand side, you would see a big orange block that says 8.3. And on FY26, you'd see a big orange block that says 13.9, which is the ongoing gap we have going forward. If you might recall from the budget presentation we did to get to the $24-25 million reduction, I talked about it being a lot of little rocks that were stacked. And so we've been working really hard to figure out how we're going to solve this 8.3 stack. These numbers aren't exact. The strategies have adapted even from last week to this week. So some of these numbers are a little different. I just didn't want to change the slide because I wanted to keep consistent. We're going to walk through the ones that are in FY25 in some detail here in just one second. But essentially what we did was stack up what we could to get through this year. And we tried to do this in a way that would minimize impacts to the community and organization, in part because we know the services are really needed, and also because we didn't want to do it on a supplemental budget year. We wanted, if we are going to have a larger impact, we want to do that as part of a regular budget process and part of your process. So we essentially came up with $3 million worth of ongoing reductions, a little bit less than that now, and I'm going to walk through those. Some ongoing revenues that we know we can achieve with revenue sources that we already have administrative authority over. There's some one-time reductions. There's a larger one-time revenue source that's related to selling property. And then what we came up with, and this is one of the things we walked through with the revenue advisors, was a new revenue source. It's not actually a new revenue source, but it's using our stormwater fee, our stormwater utility revenue as an opportunity to pay for more park services. And this is something that's been discussed off and on for 10 plus years. And we do fund a number of parks activities that are stormwater eligible now. This would be a small change that would allow us to achieve about $1 million. And that $1 million is actually pretty significant because that saves us from having to do more drastic cuts that I'm about to go to. When you do that, what happens is there's a chunk of that goes over and drops that ongoing number down. We know we can achieve another 300 in ongoing revenue that's already built into this year's budget. And so what we're proposing, and we can talk about more probably in the fall as we develop the proposal, is a potential new fee that starts to look at our fire service similar to stormwater wastewater utility, and a fee for that service. So we have walked through that. It's happening in many places around the state and around the country. We did a presentation that some of you may have watched, and we'll continue to work on that. This is the area where we understand the makes sense and feels right part's going to be really important. So there's quite a bit more work to do here. But as part of that, we also hope to enhance our fire service and be able to achieve the squad unit that we know can, and Chief Caven will be here if he's not here already, that can respond to a lot of those lower acuity calls that we get a lot of, and also serve as a resource potentially for wildland fires. So I just wanted to walk through that. It's a little bit harder when it's all in one piece, but that's what matters. So I'm going to switch back over to the left-hand side. I'm going to walk you through, starting with the ongoing reductions, what's actually built into the supplemental budget, I think. All right. So as you can see, the top left is supposed to be that bottom block. It's a lower number. So as we've worked through this, we've actually shifted more to one time than ongoing. But here are the ongoing pieces. I'm going to walk through them in a little bit of detail because I know there's a lot of questions. And I just want to say again, we really tried to minimize the impact to the community and to our employees. And I was asked by one of the revenue advisors whether or a comment was made or an observation made, did we not like cutting employees? Like almost as if it was a something we just didn't like to do. And I addressed that in the same way I would address it now. Like, yeah, we don't want to do it, in particular because that's how our services are delivered. And I have not been to a single meeting since I've been in this job where people have told me they have plenty of what they need. I consistently get, we want more hours, we want more police patrol, we want more maintenance. So we do really try to preserve the people and the services. So the library reduction is related to vacancy savings resulting from 2 currently vacant part-time positions at the libraries, and by adjusting the downtown library's hours of operation on Sundays. Changes to the opening hours will enhance organizational well-being for staff and create time for additional maintenance of the facility while improving operational efficiencies. Additionally, this will align the delivery of services to patrons more closely with current community needs and usage patterns of the services and facilities. These changes are in response to a recent survey indicating the need for improved facility cleanliness and addressing safety concerns. The EPD training, and again, we have team members here that can go into more detail if you need it. The EPD training team staff realignment is essentially what happened is that several budgets ago, police added FTE with a experiment of trying to do doing their training team in a different way. What they found, what they thought it was going to do was realize efficiencies in scheduling and overtime, and what they've actually experienced hasn't led to that. And so what they want to do is fall back and revert to how they used to previously do this with 1 sergeant and 1 officer and using ad hoc assignments. So EPD still has a high level of staff training, but they believe they can achieve these savings. The record staff realignment is related to a records management position that's been vacant for some amount of time and a half record specialist position. They've been functioning without that manager for a while, and they are going to redistribute that work to the operations support lieutenant, who currently has the capacity to ensure that it's properly supervised. Communication, oh, dang it. I'm like going forward in my head, but it's not really there. The communications division realignment is, it's a change in the way the 911 communications training program happens, and it redeploys training responsibilities back to existing supervisor, as that training model has proved really effective in the past. Reduces 1 vacant supervisor position and maintains high level of required training. A custodial service reduction is reduces the budget by 1 FTE. It's a vacant position. We'll move on. Downtown right-of-way cleanup funding realignment. This has to do with the downtown right-of-way cleanup. In most parts of the city, the downtown right-of-way cleanup is funded by the road fund and the stormwater fund. And then the downtown, we haven't done that. It's been general fund. This is a great example of our all-in exec approach to how we solve these problems and how we serve the community. Public Works thought that they could handle that capacity. And so this shifts the general fund budget to those other, and it's very consistent with how we do it with the rest of the city. Downtown event coordinator funding realignment is moving the downtown pavilion events coordinator position into the cultural services subfund, which better aligns with their associated revenues. The downtown support realignment and PDD is moving a half of a position into urban renewal that's supporting the downtown urban renewal projects that recently got increased. And then the public safety justice funding realignment is essentially shifting some information services resources that are supporting PSJ into the PSJ and out of information services, which frees up some rates in the general fund. So you might remember I had the small little ongoing revenue piece, and that is related to some recreation fee increases and transportation network company revenue that we believe we can achieve. One-time reduction, so we can do this once. The health claim reduction is related to the fact that we're self-insured, and we have lower than projected health claims during the biennium, and so we believe that we can achieve one-time this savings by reducing people's rates because we have those lower than expected asks. The fires reductions are being managed by Chief Cave, and he might be able to talk about this more through vacancies and material supply savings through the rest of the biennium. And then the LRCS position vacancies savings, same thing. I should mention that both over the last couple of years, we've done some studies and audits of different programs. As you might recall, we did one of fire services. We've done one of alternative response. And as part of what we're moving forward, as part of this is also a deeper look at our recreation programs and fees, and a look at our central business functions to continue to ensure that we're doing things as efficiently as possible. It could be that we learn that the 285 less positions have come from there, and so we want to understand that. And then the one-time revenue is related to property sales. And we've, in the past, so for a good example is when the Urban Renewal Agency bought the old Lane Community College building. We bought it for $500,000, and then we RFP'd it in order to find somebody to do housing in that spot, and which should be coming out of the ground soon. It's mixed income housing. There's at least 2 pieces of property in the downtown. We believe we could do a similar sale to the Urban Renewal Agency and generate some one-time revenue. Okay, I'm gonna go back. Sorry, Twyla. So those things together, we feel can get us through the biennium. They're not painless. Nothing's painless at this point, but we feel like it gets us through, puts us on solid ground to continue working on new revenue proposals. And if we aren't able to achieve that, we can build it into the biennium. And now I'll go back to Twyla.
Thank you. So we'll take a look at our reserve here. So just as a reminder, our reserves are a key financial indicator, and our main reserve is the reserve for revenue shortfall. It's our financial cushion, which is a key part of our financial management, and it's a factor in our high credit rating. And having a high credit rating translates into lower borrowing costs for the city, which saves taxpayer resources over the long term. And then also having an adequate reserves provides the ability to weather unexpected events and time to develop solutions as new challenges arise. So our general fund reserves have remained below the target level since the pandemic. And the budget strategies we have discussed today will help address the structural gap in the short term, as well as to gradually build up reserves to meet and eventually exceed the target level by the end of the forecast period. What I'll note is when you see the slide at the end, the trajectory is based on current assumptions and service level. And as costs continue to rise due to inflation, personnel costs, and other forecast drivers, I anticipate our out-year reserve picture will not remain as rosy as you'll see here in a moment. As we know, we have a long-term structural imbalance in the general fund without additional long-term strategies. So this first line is our savings account target of 4% of biennial expenses. And then the blue line is the previous base case forecast we reviewed in December when we met on the supplemental budget, and that included the $10.5 million placeholder for ongoing new revenue. And then the red line is the current base case forecast with a $13.9 million new revenue placeholder. So $8.3 million in this year, an additional 5.6 in the next year. And again, this was increased from our December number due to the upward cost pressures I talked about a little earlier. And then the final line is our current base case forecast. So this assumes all of the solutions Sarah talked about, which would be implemented over the next 2 years. So if successful in the solution set, which includes the stormwater fee, the fire stabilization service fee, and includes the budget strategies we talked about today, and we remove the revenue placeholder, it shows that our budget gap strategies would achieve a similar trajectory and reserve level by the end of the forecast period based on today's solution set. And so when you look at kind of out to the 27-29 biennium, you see that we're above, again, that target level. And that's what I'm referring to as, over time, as we see the additional pressures on the system, I would expect those to come down more in line with the target level. We'll need additional strategies in the future. Okay, so now we'll talk a little bit about the other things in the supplemental budget. So we'll start with the general fund. going to stay at a pretty high level here today. The agenda item summary, or AIS, for the June 24th council session will have a lot more detail in it at that time. But in the general fund, we have revenue-backed requests, which are primarily grants and reimbursements. So we are recognizing an additional $2.9 million for an all-in emergency shelter grant from the state to provide funding for ongoing, continuing our operations at 4 of the city's safe sleep sites through FY25. We're also recognizing some other grants for the police department and community court, as well as reimbursements for state wildfire response and cross-billing with Springfield for shared Eugene Springfield fire staff and resources. And then we're also recognizing a PERS rate adjustment. So this is a $1.4 million reduction due to a PERS bond rate adjustment that will begin this July. This number here shows the general fund savings. However, all funds with personnel will experience savings in the second year of the biennium. As a reminder, I think we've talked about this before, but as a reminder, in 2002, the city issued pension obligation bonds to pay down the estimated unfunded PERS actuarial liability at that time. And since then, we've assessed an annual percentage of employee wages in order to pay the debt service each year on those bonds. The rate is reviewed annually and we adjust as needed to ensure that we're collecting enough to pay the debt and have enough in the fund without collecting more than is actually required. So in the adopted budget, the pension bond rate was budgeted at 5.5% of wages. However, with recent experience and review, we're able to lower the rate to 3.75% in the second year of the biennium, which results in these savings. Okay, and now we move on to the non-general fund. So this shows that supplemental budget actions by category. So we have capital projects. We're recognizing $23.2 million. This would include $10 million for airport projects that include inland baggage system upgrades and concourse expansion and ramp design plans, and $6 million in grant funding and related capital expenditures for 11th Avenue and Crow Road a service extension. One-time requests include $3.5 million to recognize necessary budget authority for MWMC, or the Metropolitan Wastewater Management Commission budget, in the second year of the biennium, and also $3.3 million for the Halt Center, which is experiencing increased activity above projections at the time of the proposed budget, which is great news. We're also recognizing grants and reimbursements in the non-general funds. This would include $1.3 million in BLS peak hour ambulance revenue related to House Bill 4136. So this will allocate additional funds to Eugene Springfield Fire for peak hour 12-hour shifts for basic life service ambulance coverage for the next 2 years. And then also $800,000 for ambulance patient offload revenue. It recognizes revenue from a new patient offload time fee, which was established in June of 2023. And then a couple of funds we'll talk about specifically. So in the City Hall Fund, we are appropriating funds for the remaining remodeling costs for City Hall, which is about $2.4 million. And with the remaining $2 million in the fund, we are going to make a payment on the note payable to BWeb that was part of the City Hall purchase. So this will include $160,000 for the first year of interest and almost $2 million to pay down the note payable. So these actions will use the remaining balance available in the fund, and just over $2 million, so $2,080,000 will remain outstanding on the note payable to BWeb. And then in our community safety payroll tax funds, we are making several investments that will be recognized on the supplemental budget, including court-appointed attorneys and funding for wildfire planning and fuels mitigation, as well as police equipment and an online reporting program. And on the supplemental budget, we are making some FTE adds in the non-general funds. This would include a position in our community safety payroll tax fund to support the wildfire planning and fuels mitigation program, and also some FTE investment in public works, including a maintenance worker and a park specialist. And then the final category here is something we're calling administrative adjustments. These really are technical corrections that weren't processed on the December supplemental budget, and also truing up capital project budgets in the second year of the biennium. And then we have one more slide. We'll talk a little bit about the Urban Renewal Agency. So over the past few months, Council has provided policy direction both for both urban renewal districts since the adoption of the 2023-2025 budget last summer. These supplemental budget actions provide budget authority to align with those actions, including the plan amendment for the Riverfront District and related projects, as well as approved projects for the downtown district. And with that, we'll wrap things up. The next steps in our process, we'll have feedback and conversation with you tonight. We are having a public hearing for the stormwater service fee that will occur on June 17th. Potentially, we could take potential action on the stormwater ordinance on June 24th, which is the same night the City Council will consider the supplemental budget. There will be a public hearing as part of the supplemental budget, and then we will need the council to take action not only for these budget actions, but also to set the tax rate for the second year of the biennium. And then staff will be working over the summer, and we will bring back conversations to council in the fall about a potential fire service fee and a range of work sessions there. And with that, I'll just look to Sarah to see if she has anything she would like to add before we turn things back to the chair.
I think the only thing I would add, Twyla, was as you were talking, I was reflecting on all of this. I was thinking about one of the benefits. It was actually when you were talking about fire. One of the benefits that we've experienced this year of going to a biennial budget is the amount of flexibility that has allowed us to respond to near-term things like the university district closure, and also flexibility in how we implement a number of these strategies that just sort of eases the peaks and the valleys. And so I didn't anticipate that as much as I did the long-term kind of focus, but it's been a really great, true benefit. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've put into chat our order for the round robin. So for questions and comments, I'd like to turn first to Councillor Ye, followed by Councillor Semple.
Thanks so much, Chair, but I don't have questions at this time.
Thank you. Councillor Semple, then followed by Ryan Konofsky.
A couple of things. The $1 million from the stormwater fund to go to parks, so that can go to the general fund. What was that $1 million going to be used for? And is that something we need, or are we paying for it some other way?
It's new revenue, so
we're increasing
yes.
the water fee. Okay, yeah. Forgot about that.
Thanks.
Thank you. And of course, I'm concerned about $500,000 in downtown cuts. So I know everybody's getting cut, but we also know I think that's vitally important. So I'm concerned. Thank you.
I don't think there is a $500,000 downtown cut. It's a transfer, so it's being paid for out of a different fund. So the service stays the same.
Okay. Well, I didn't catch that.
Okay.
Thank you. Ryan Konofsky, followed by Raina Jackson.
Thank you. I had a question about the graph that in looking back at old meetings, it was fun and moved a lot, and then it didn't for us. With those changes, I saw when it did move, it kind of transferred over from 8 million to the 13 million bucket. Well, how much of an assumption is that? We don't want to look too far forward, but how much does that keep carrying forward to future, projected losses, or is that just does it kind of end in the 26 budget or revenue shortfall? Sorry.
Are you talking about the solution slide and what?
Oh, yeah, the one that was supposed to move and it didn't. Yeah.
The one where there could be a gap. So on that, we were anticipating after all of those actions, I believe that there might be up to a $900,000-ish, $1 million-ish gap that would continue into the FY27. So that'd be the third year. And but we're continuing to look at our services and refine strategies. And so we think that'll be part of the ongoing solution as we build the next biennial budget that will come back next spring to talk to the budget committee and council about. So while there is a remaining gap under this set of assumptions, we are planning to address that as we build the next budget.
Perfect. So it will continue to close the gap, hopefully into the future. Is that more or less, or it continues to help with the gap, I guess?
It continues to help with the gap in the short term. So if I'm understanding what you're thinking, yes, it helps us right size in the short term, but without other longer term strategies, we know that we'll still have that imbalance over time. And so at some point out farther in the forecast, we know that that still remains, and we'll need to continue to do work. So that's why it's a coordinated, interconnected solution, and we're really looking at what are the actions we can take now to mitigate over the next couple of years while we're still working with council and others on some of these longer term strategies that will be larger conversations. Some we can have at the city, and some are broader conversations.
Yep, perfect. No, I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to know it doesn't kind of end in 26 and it continues to help the problem. Kind of a more, I guess, a futurist question, but maybe the future is coming quicker than we're ready for. With a lot of these gaps in services and just new changing models, have we started to look at AI, artificial intelligence, to help kind of offset these tasks that in my workforce background, we keep hearing about the things that people don't need to keep doing, right? And management area, I hear you. We don't want to lose positions. I would never advocate for offloading our positions, but those ones that just continue to stay open, that have we thought about leaning into those new technologies to help increase what our communities are hoping for, with maybe less people but more automated systems that are evolving goodness every day.
Yeah, I appreciate that. We haven't actually come up with a city-wide strategy, but I do know different areas of the city are looking at different ways of implementing that technology. And while it's not AI, I will say that I sat in on a building and permit services division meeting some months ago, and was looking at the numbers of permits that have come in and also the time of review. This may be grossly overgeneralizing it, but because of the way that we have moved to all online review, all of that, we've been able to achieve the same times without hiring more people. And so over time, you can see that technology didn't save any of our employees' time, but we didn't actually have to add people, even though we might need to. So I do think there are some strategies there that help us grow more than reduce.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And then, looking back at these revenue options, I want to echo some of the sentiments of the counselors that had advocated for, scalable options to make sure we're not harming our low-income populations, with any of these changes as much as possible. So, I definitely would echo those sentiments that we want to make sure any future changes we do to increasing our revenues, we hold folks that can't afford it, as harmless as we can, while still recognizing we do need many critical services in our community. And that is all, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Raina Jackson, followed by Councilor Keating.
Yeah, just to say, I don't have any questions, but I personally want to extend my gratitude to Sarah and Twyla and the rest of the team that worked with our Revenue Advisory Committee. Just personally, a lot of information that was coming in, and they took the time, just like they do in these meetings, to do robust presentations, robust packages, and answering questions outside of the meeting times as well. So thank you for that, and look forward to how we can move those ideas and everything else forward.
Thank you. Councilor Keating, followed by Councilor Groves.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question about, and I've brought this up in work session before, but I don't think I've brought it up at a budget meeting. I have a question about the amount of annual dues or fees that are paid to either statewide, regional, or national organizations that the city of Eugene belongs to, and what we get out of said fees. Yeah. what's the advantage of participating in statewide, regional, or national organizations? Has that helped our bottom line? Has it helped bring resources to this community? So I would just like to request that for the next time this body gathers, if possible. Appreciate the opportunity to ask the question. Thank you to our colleagues, our citizen budget committee members who are participating. And Eliza, I don't know if now's the time, Chair, but a point of personal privilege. Thank you, Eliza Kaczynski, for your service on this budget committee. You're cycling off as a budget committee representative and cycling on as a city councilor-elect. Congratulations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Groves, followed by Zach Mahal.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Twyla and Sarah, for the presentation. It was equally good the second time. But I want to pick up on something that Raina said that I think is very true. I mean, it's easy to look at this work and say, well, that didn't look too hard. But the reality is, coming from the other side of this, it's tremendously difficult and at times gut-wrenching. And I am grateful that we have staff in all of our departments, in central services, city manager, we have competent staff that are able to rise to the calling. And I do believe that as hard as it is at times, as gut-wrenching as it is at times, I think it does help us get to a better place sometimes by being challenged like this. And so I just wanted to express my appreciation. I really don't have questions right now. I think most of those I asked during the council work session, and I'm sure it'll come up as we get into this deeper. And then the last piece I wanted to mention, just my own response to Councilor Keating. I think it's a good question that you ask, but I can say, at least I know from the fire side, the Oregon State Fire Chiefs Association was hand in hand with our department when we pushed and got GEMT funding, which, for Eugene Springfield Fire brought in $4.5 million last year. And these organizations advocate on our behalf and our industry's behalf, and they provide great education. You have colleagues in other organizations, and I think we get a tremendous amount, at least out of the ones I'm familiar with. So I just wanted to share that, but I'm sure others can say more about their particular work areas. So anyway, thank you very much. And also, I want to acknowledge Eliza as she matriculates out of budget committee and into council work. So we'll look forward to having you on board as a new colleague. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Zach Mulholland, followed by Ryan Moore.
Yeah, I'd also just like to start by thanking staff and the Revenue Committee for all of the important work that you did to help balance the budget. And I guess I would just like to ask some questions about sort of the next steps, looking at funding for important future services. So with regards to homelessness services and affordable housing funding, did the revenue team identify which sources of revenue would be best for homelessness services or affordable housing projects?
They did, or they came up with a set of them. I don't have it right in front of my eyes, but we did, what we tried to do as part of the strategy, Zach, was to make sure that the ones that made the most sense for the near-term gap, that we kept that really focused so that the other revenue sources that were identified as possible for the near-term gap could also fund new services. So for example, increases in franchise fees could potentially help with the gap, but it's also a really good source for future work. So I don't remember exactly what they said. There were a couple in there, including an income tax that people felt would be very appropriate for housing.
Were bonds or levies
yeah,
high likelihood actions?
Bonds for sure. In terms of capital investments, they're not a good ongoing source, and they sort of shied away. Levies are also good for a short-term gap, but it's harder to be on a it's not stable and secure in the long run. But we did talk about it.
And then what about in terms of what would be funded in terms of homelessness services and scale? I mean, would it be the TAC report and what's underfunded from that, or is there a good sense of what we would like to fund in the area of homelessness services?
Yeah, we didn't get into that. I think everybody acknowledged that there's still policy discussions that need to happen around new and expanded services to determine what those might be.
Yeah, I think just recognizing that as federal COVID dollars run out, the county homelessness services budget is about to be cut by about 25%. And as we look to go into this winter with less homelessness services than we have right now, I'm extremely concerned. And I would just ask council and the revenue team and staff to maybe to act with a real sense of urgency to think, is it possible to put forward something to voters or to the council sooner rather than later? We acted with urgency to put a bond measure for the stadium. And I would think that maybe we could act with some urgency to put together a bond measure for homelessness services and affordable housing if we have a good sense of what we would want to ask voters for. Thank you.
Thank you. Ryan Moore, followed by Councilor Leach.
Thanks, Chair. Just echoing Councilor Groves and saying, you all made this look really simple, and I know that it's really not, so thank you for that. And kind of chiming in on Commissioner Mulholland, his note, and kind of, Councilor Zelenka mentioned this at the last work session. Right now, our construction excise tax is set at half what is allowed by state law at 0.5%. We could easily up that to what is allowed and what many other cities in Oregon charge at 1% on new construction. And that would help us build a whole lot more housing too. My only question, and I hope it's an easy one. So if we do go the route with eWeb administering the new fees for stormwater and fire, do we know what they'll charge to administer those? I know it's surely less than if we did it ourselves or contracted.
There's always this moment where I'm not sure if I'm supposed to answer or somebody else is. We have an idea from past work that we could probably scale. And we're trying to learn. We have a request for information out to learn what it would cost to do it ourselves. So we're evaluating that. And yeah, thanks.
That ends it for me then. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Leach, to be followed by Siobhan Cancel.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Sarah and Twyla. And I really appreciated the ability to be and the privilege to be on the Revenue Committee. I learned a lot and appreciate this presentation as well. I don't have any comments or questions today, but just want to express all my appreciation.
Thank you. Siobhan Cancel, followed by Eliza Kaczynski.
Thank you so much. Oh, I first want to echo Raina's comments as well as several others about the Revenue Committee and the work that was done there. Going into that, it was a little nerve-wracking because it was a big ask, and the solutions that came out I felt were really balanced and really thoughtful, and so that was that experience there. I also wanted to highlight something that Councilor Simple had brought up. Downtown is experiencing a lot of challenges, and we have worked very hard to make sure that we were continuing to try and address those challenges, to continue one-time funding that had gone to downtown, to continue all those sort of things. When I first saw this slide presentation, I got very, very nervous because it did look like there were cuts to the services that would happen to downtown. And so just to be absolutely clear, and I know you answered this question already, we are not discussing cutting funding for the downtown services. We are discussing funding those services in a different way. That's correct.
Yes. Okay. Solidly, there's no proposed reductions to downtown. When I looked at the slide after the fact, after you said that, I was like, oh, right, it says ongoing reductions. It could have said and funding shifts. So that's what it is. It's a funding shift.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go now to Siobhan, followed by Jesse Maldonado.
Thank you, Chair. And once again, just wowed by the budget and all the work that goes into it. I may have missed this. Is this revenue committee something that we'll be doing regularly now? Because it seems to have helped peel back that curtain for some people.
No, it was a short-term ask of mine for folks to just learn and give me some advice. I have considered continuing having some type of fiscal advisors that can continue to learn and stay up to speed on what happens at the city, because a lot of people just don't know.
Okay, cool. My only questions would be when I was listening to the cuts for APD's communications position for the supervisor for the 911 calls. I just remember from a previous meeting or meetings hearing about how 911 calls were like being overflooded, or there was so many that people weren't able to get to them all. And I'm just a little worried about how that will look. And then there was also it looked like a reduction in the public safety justice system. And so I'm curious, how would that look in actuality? Like, is that less people? Is that less materials?
Yeah, thank you so much for that. So the public safety justice system is similar to downtown. It's a funding shift. It's not a reduction. And I don't know if Chris is available, Chief Skinner is available to talk about your question around 911. I know we had an overlap tonight of an EPD awards ceremony in this, so he could be. This shouldn't impact that, what you're talking about, but okay, here he is.
Yeah, I'm here, and so as I'm pulling into my driveway after this awards ceremony, can I just get a refresher on what's the question specifically?
Sure. I was just wondering, with the cuts to the EPD communications position, which I think is the supervisor for the 911 calls, how that would affect the 911 calls, because I've heard in the past that we can't get to all of them, or we struggle, or stuff like that.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, this is specifically a management position that was specific. We built it specifically for training. So we put our call takers and our dispatchers, our new employees, through a variety of training. This was a standalone position that kind of monitored and oversaw training. What we're doing is we're not taking away that training function. We're just redistributing that training function back to our first line supervisors, which we have 4 or 5 of those that will share those duties. So we're just reverting back to what we did. Same amazing training, just a different way to deliver that. Shouldn't impact anything to do with the ability to answer calls for service.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I do have a similar question about the fire and safety, because I saw that we were doing some cuts there, and I feel like we cut last budgets as well. So I'm just curious how that'll look.
Yeah, so that question here in the second half of this biennial budget, we're going to achieve through some positions that took a little bit longer to fill. Our alternative response manager position, which is just getting underway, and some other materials and services spaces. We have a long-term and ongoing strategy and some workforce adjustments. We just need a little bit more time to land that with our stakeholders before we push it forward and say this is how we're going into the next biennial budget to address those reductions. So no effect to ongoing service today for us.
Cool. Thank you. And then I do have a curiosity question of my own. Sarah, while you were digging through all those old FTE, like per 1,000 population, did you find any information on like race or ethnicity?
There's not, I don't think I saw any tables. I have to go back and look at that specifically. There's definitely comments. It's pretty interesting. When you read it, it's as if you're reading today. A lot of people talking about how the diversity of the region is changing and that we need to adapt for that. And that was sort of a consistent theme, but I don't recall seeing a table, but I can go back and look.
That would be cool. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Jesse Maldonado, followed by Councilor Zelenka.
Thank you, Chairman. I was trying to think of a fun way to phrase my thank you, but everyone's taken my words already. So thanks to everyone on the committee who put in all the work. Very fascinating. Having had conversations with folks on this committee already in the last few months, trying to figure out how we solve this shortfall. Everyone was like, I don't know. And here we are. And it looks like we have some really, really solid solutions. So great work. And I appreciate all the hard work. As the newbie here, I have a few questions. I have questions on the stormwater service fee and the fire service fee. When these proposals do come forward to us, in those proposals, will there be a sunset in them? I'm sure that'll be a question that will be asked of us. Or is it something that might be in perpetuity that we deal with further down the road?
Well, we haven't, so the stormwater, we have not anticipated a sunset in either of these because we're trying to solve an ongoing problem. So the stormwater is a smaller piece and it's coming sooner. I think the fire service fee, we're going to be doing a lot of work over the summer trying to understand how it would be structured, who actually receives the bill, what are the impacts, how do you resolve and solve for low income. So there's a lot to answer there, and I can imagine people will bring that up, but we're not anticipating suggesting that.
Great, thank you. And one other question I did have, because you'd mentioned it and I saw the chief was here, but the squad unit, just curious if we could spell that out really quickly. I was just kind of curious how it will play out.
Yeah, that's a great question. We talked a little bit during the biennial budget process when we were looking at potentially closing an engine and replacing it with a squad. The general concept is it takes our normal engine company staffing down to 2, and it puts them on a smaller, lighter vehicle. The one we plan to deploy, when the city manager talked about its ability to do some wildfire work, its primary mission as a fire suppression unit is outside fire, small fires, wildfire. But they would be able to respond to all the EMS emergencies, which is the majority of the work that we do. The 2 people are capable of performing a rescue in a structure fire or doing other fire-related functions. It's just not a fully functional fire company, but it is a good way as we strategize, not only for the immediate needs, but as we grow, we can grow with those squads a little more quickly into neighborhoods, get the deployment right before we step up into the longer term traditional fire companies. But it's an alternative way to cover a bigger area a little bit faster with a smaller crew tailor-made to the issues that it would respond to.
Great. Thank you, Chief. That's all I have, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Zelenka, to be followed by Councilor Evans.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This is actually the 3rd time we've heard this. It was on the Revenue Advisors Committee, and then we heard it at Council, and then we heard it here. So I've pretty much asked all the questions I have. I will note, though, that was very interesting about the history slides, about, in particular, the FTE per thousand people in Eugene, and all the other slides that Sarah and her team put up. I think it's really significant, all of the changes that have been made over the last several years, leading to where we find ourselves today, which is either needing more revenue or making pretty deep cuts into police, fire, library, parks, which are the general fund services where this problem lies. So hopefully that was very educational for people and creating a mindset about where we are and what needs to be done. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilor Evans, followed by myself.
Right. Thanks, Mr. Chair, and deep appreciation out to staff who put all of this together. One of the questions that I have is more related to the CSI, which is one of the few new revenue sources that we have over the last few years, and how that is being allocated across public safety, and more specifically in terms of how services are being delivered outside of the downtown core with relation to the CSI, and most specifically with regard to police services. So if Chief Skinner, could you talk a little bit more about that? Because those are questions that I'm getting from people in my ward all the time is, you know, great, we got the CSI, but it looks like there's an over emphasis or focus on certain parts of the city that are not evident in other parts of the city.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I get that too, Councilor Evans, where people are trying to get a good sense of the value that they're getting for the payroll tax that they're paying. What I can say is the Community Safety Initiative, which is now the Community Safety Payroll Tax, is supporting services citywide. One of the greatest examples of that is the community services officers that prior to the payroll tax, we had 5, and now we have 20 that are citywide, handling more calls for service and responding to a variety of things. We've been able to hire more officers. Now, it doesn't necessarily feel like that because of the number of vacancies we have, but more FTE for officers, which we see when we're able to get people hired, we'll see a positive outcome out in the community when it comes to that. Specifically, I know that the downtown core gets a lot of communication around whether it's heavy in the downtown, and the community safety payroll tax right now is only supporting our co-responder model in the downtown, which we're hoping to be a pilot program that we can look at how we might expand that citywide. And so we've started in the downtown just because of the dense population of people that are suffering from mental and behavioral health issues that we're seeing down there. We're hoping to, if successful, think about a model that would go more citywide, so we can respond to those types of things. So I'm sensitive to the fact that people want to feel value for that payroll tax. Sometimes that is not readily seen, oftentimes, and as we sit today, down 25 police officer positions. Sometimes it's hard to get the number of cars in your neighborhood that I know people would like to see.
One thing to follow up on that, Chief, is what is the level of investment that we're having from CSI going into recruitment and retention of new officers?
Yeah, I'm not going to have the exact dollar amount, but I do know that we have a specific line item within the department that is specific to recruitment. Retention is a broader conversation because what retains officers is very different across the complexion of the organization. Everything, there's a variety of different things that are important to a variety of different people that keep them there, that even though we are paying attention to that. But we have a specific recruiting team that does this work, a sergeant and an officer full-time doing recruiting. Our numbers are starting to go up. I'll give Council and Budget Committee a sneak peek. I did last week or week before, I don't remember which one. I had 10 chiefs interviews, and we're getting ready to onboard as many as 11 to 12 new officers the first couple of weeks of June. And so I'm really, really pleased with the work that's being done. And the community safety payroll tax has money every single year for us to be able to do those recruiting efforts, as well as officer wellness efforts, which is, I think, concurrent with retention, making sure we're paying attention to wellness.
Thanks, Chief. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I want to echo all the thanks that everyone has offered to our Revenue Committee. This was a huge amount of work. Staff did such a great job providing it, and for the people serving on the committee who waded through all of that and came out with these, I'm just really thankful for all of that effort. I feel very good about our short-term solutions that we have proposed to get us through this biennium and through the immediate gap that we hold. I definitely want to acknowledge that I'm still very concerned about the medium-term level as our one-time funding starts to expire, and I appreciate that we also mentioned long-term concerns. That slide with the showing how often we're implementing budget strategies just about every year really resonates with me at the long-term level. I think it speaks to the fact that we have an artificial cap on how we can raise property taxes, which makes it almost impossible to just keep up in the long run. And I certainly hope at the statewide level to someday something might change about that. But I also, in the meantime, we have to be thinking about what we can do if it doesn't. And so finding ways to really generate some long-term revenue growth too isn't the conversation we're having today, and isn't the conversation we're going to have this summer. But I hope we all make sure not to let that slide out of our minds, because it definitely also needs to be there as a yes and conversation. Other than that, I just want to flag the most common question that I get from the community, and it's well answered, and when I get it, I can answer it, so I'm not looking for a response per se, but just for communication's sake. Every single time I tell anyone in the community that I'm involved with the budget committee, the first thing they ask is, what's up with this gap? Where did it come from? So I just want to flag that might not have been something that we've explained thoroughly enough to the community at large. But other than that, I'm so thankful for the work that has gone into this, and feeling a lot better than when we just had a random placeholder in the budget when we passed it. So thank you, everyone. I would like to offer, before we go to a second round, Mayor Vinnis an opportunity to share any remarks she might have.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to share that I sat as an observer through the revenue advising process, and I think the process itself was incredibly productive. So you see the outcome of it, but actually the process itself was really so thorough and fascinating. I will also say that just to your comment, Chair, at the very end, that sort of reminder that in this state, the tax structure is broken with respect to city budgets. And so one of the messages really out there is it's not just the city of Eugene that is struggling. It is every city in this state that is struggling. And we really do look to the state for a thoughtful process about really how to make some fixes. So I think that is another message to share with constituents who say, where did this gap come from? Well, we don't have a good tax structure. So anyway, thank you. It's been, I think, it's an extraordinary process. And when I think how distressing it felt at the beginning of this, how are we ever going to meet this gap? And then to see that through this really thoughtful, deliberative, and thorough process, we're landing on something that feels doable and reasonable, and that's something to be very proud of. So really incredibly grateful to everybody who brought us to this point, being able to consider these options. Thank you.
Thank you. And I saw Zach with his hand up, I'm guessing for a second round. If anyone else has any last thoughts and wants to jump into a second round, please throw up those virtual hands now. Zach.
Getting back to the revenue committee and its intended purpose of funding the short-term gap and then looking at longer-term funding solutions for homelessness and climate, what is the current thoughts on timeline for coming back to those things? Looking at the fire fee coming back in FY25 is the assumption that we would not be looking at increasing funding for homelessness services and climate likely until FY26?
Not necessarily. I think it depends on, we just haven't talked about what comes next and how. The council hasn't talked about that, but they have mentioned several of them when we've been talking about the near-term gap, not to lose sight of that. So I think it's more of just getting a few things set and then continuing. Some of them could happen concurrently.
Yeah. Do you see opportunities for some of those things to happen faster? And if yes, when or how do you think that might happen?
I think, I have to go back in. So for one, we haven't finalized the report from the revenue advisors. And when we do finalize that, we'll send it out to this group so you can see more of what they talked about. But it would be hard for me tonight to speculate what could go faster first.
Well, please do spend some time thinking about if there is anything that we can move faster in these, critical areas. Please do what you can. And then I guess I'll just ask the question that others sort of teed up, which is what is the city doing or looking at with regards to working with the League of Cities or others on statewide tax reform?
Yeah, I can answer that. So we've been pretty active with the league on this and with the other, I think I've mentioned before to this group, there's 7 cities in Oregon that have a population of 70,000 or higher that are a city manager form of government. And those 7 cities, we meet with some frequency. And so it started with the city managers, then the mayors have also been meeting. So all 7 of us represent a population that's equal to or greater than Portland, which is sort of one of the ways we started. And we have very similar issues that we face. So it's a really good connection of mid-sized cities. We've been working on it. We're meeting, that group's meeting in June to talk about where are we aligned. And then the league is doing some statewide work where they've brought in a consultant who's done some of this work in California to evaluate across the state what the possibilities might be. What do people really understand about the tax system? What is their appetite for revenue? And they invited me to be one of their advisors. So I'm one of, I think, 15 or maybe less advisors that work just started. So they're hosting focus groups around the state. What they learn from those focus groups will inform a statewide survey, which will then inform some of their next recommendations. So work's underway. I had the opportunity to observe one of the focus groups, and it's pretty fascinating, actually. Good work. I'll keep you updated on it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Did anyone else need a second round? Looks like we are good. Thank you for a robust discussion, as always. I appreciate all of the thoughtful comments. We've got a little bit of business before we can head off tonight. First of all, minutes from the December 6th meeting were sent out. Did anyone have any recommended changes or comments to those? And seeing none, would anyone like to make a motion to approve them?
I move that we approve the December 6th, 2023 Budget Committee meeting minutes.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Moved by Eliza, seconded by Ryan K. All in favor, please raise your hands and keep them raised. I'm seeing all 15 members that are present. Thank you. Just to make sure my count is right, any opposed? Any abstentions? That's what I thought. Thank you very much. With that, the next order of business is that this is our first meeting of the calendar year. We didn't have the typical February meeting this year. And so that means that we need to elect officers for 2024. We'll start off with chair and then move to vice chair. So does anyone have a nomination for the office of chair? Ryan Konofsky.
I'll nominate Ty Pruitt-Zimmerman for chair.
Thank
I'll
you.
second.
Do we have any other nominations for chair? Seeing none, we can vote by acclamation with just one nominee. All in favor of me continuing on as chair? I'm once again seeing 15 hands. Thank you so much. I appreciate the vote of confidence. I'm happy to continue to serve. Do we have any nominations for vice chair? Councilor Ye.
Yeah, I would like to nominate Ryan K.
Second.
Thank you. Do we have any other nominations for vice chair? Seeing none. Once again, acclamation. All in favor of Ryan Konofsky as vice chair? Once again, I'm seeing 15 hands. Thank you very much. And Ryan, I look forward to working with you. With that, I want to acknowledge that we have 3 citizen members whose terms are scheduled to expire this June. One of them, Jesse Maldonado, has applied for a second term, but the other 2 are Eliza Kaczynski and Raina Jackson, who are participating in their final budget committee meeting as citizen members tonight. Raina, I want to first thank you. You always have brought incredibly thoughtful comments to our meetings, and it's been a really wonderful experience working with you. And you were on that revenue committee that we all just spent a ton of time thanking the extensive amount of work that went into that. So once again, I want to bring back that. Thank you so much for everything you put into getting us to this place where we're able to move forward. And I just have appreciated your service so much. I wish you well. And then that leaves Eliza, who has been my vice chair for the past 3 years, who also served on the revenue committee and is, of course, as has been mentioned a few times tonight, city councilor-elect. So we will be seeing you back on this committee starting in January. I'm imagining you might miss one meeting if we get one in the fall. But even so, thank you so much for your service as a citizen member. Your support as my vice chair has been invaluable to my ability to run these meetings as smoothly as they go. And I just really appreciate everything that you have done for us in your 2 terms as a citizen member of the budget committee. This is traditionally when we would be handing out a plaque if we were in person. Not quite there yet, so that'll be coordinated individually behind the scenes. But just once again, thank you both. If everyone wants to take a moment for a round of applause, I think that would be warranted. And with that, we can move into wrap-up. We will have, of course, the council hearing on the supplemental budget on June 24th. That will be an opportunity for public comment on the supplemental budget for anyone in the general audience looking to share their opinions. As for what's next for the budget committee, that calendar is still under development for the coming cycle, so we'll be hearing more details from staff over the summer as we get that figured out. And if anyone has any additional questions, as always, email our budget manager, Christina, and that's all I've got. So thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful night. We are adjourned at 7:05 p.m.